On today's episode, I'll get into the top 10 of my current Blackhawks prospects list. Come find out who I have ranked between numbers 6 through 10 in the organization.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can go and check me out on X at Jack Bushman2, but make sure to follow my strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey, so that way you don't miss out on any of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And I also got to give one quick shout out here as well to today's sponsor, which is Game Time. Go and download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps for $20 off on your first purchase. All right, Blackhawks fans, on today's episode, it's part 3 of my Chicago Blackhawks Summer 2025 Top Prospects list. Make sure to go and check out part 1 and part 2, though, if you haven't done so already, as it only makes sense to go about these things in order, right? And also, during segment 3 on today's episode, make sure to stick around to hear my key takeaways that I had from Mason West's interview with Jon Gruden from Barstool Sports. I know there's a lot of varying opinions out there about Barstool, but I don't know anyone who doesn't love Jon Gruden, and I thought this was a fabulous interview with the Blackhawks' 29th overall selection in the 2025 NHL Draft. But for segment 1 on today's show, it's time to get into my top 10 prospects in the Blackhawks organization. Real quick, though, a recap of where I left off. Go and check out parts 1 and 2, though, for a full breakdown on each one of these prospects and the reasoning behind where they came in the rankings. Honorable mentions, I had Landon Slaggert, Martin Misiak, Samuel Savoie, Adam Guyan, and Nathan Bem. Then kicking things off in my top 20, big left-handed defenseman Nolan Allen. At number 19, I had AJ Spellacy of the Windsor Spitfires. 18, I have Aiden Thompson, joined on the pro scene late after wrapping up his junior year with Denver. Number 17, I have John Mustard, 2024 third-round pick, about to play his sophomore year with Providence. 16, I have Colton Dock, going to be competing for one of those final roster spots in the Blackhawks opening night lineup. At number 15, I had big left-handed defenseman Ethan Del Mastro in a similar situation to Colton Dock, but obviously on the defensive side of things. At number 14, I then had Ryan Greene, who joined on with the Blackhawks after closing out his junior season with Boston University. At number 13, I had the man I mentioned a moment ago in Mason West. Then at number 12, I had the player selected 4 picks ahead of Mason West in this year's draft in Vaclav Nestrasil. And last, I had at number 11 to close out part 2, 2024 third-round selection as well, Jack Pridham of the Kitchener Rangers. Picking up where I left off now and getting into my top 10 Blackhawks fans. Coming in at number 10, I have Marek Vanacker, the 27th overall pick for the Blackhawks in 2024. Blackhawks, like they did for Mason West this year, traded back into the first round with the Carolina Hurricanes to go and nab Marek Vanacker. He's a 6'1", 170-pound winger that just turned 19 years old in April, and he recorded 42 points, 24 goals, 18 assists, and 45 OHL games with the Brantford Bulldogs this season, which isn't necessarily the ideal production we wanted to see out of Vanacker. However, he did miss, all of training camp and a good chunk of the start of the season due to having to undergo off-season shoulder injury, but definitely picked up his play as the season progressed, was one of the better players offensively for Brantford when they were going down the home stretch of the regular season, and in the OHL playoffs, tallied 11 points, 6 goals, and 5 assists in 11 postseason games. And during his draft year, he was right on the fringe of being, a mid to early second round selection, but because he broke out in such a major way, tallying 82 points, 36 goals, 46 assists, and 68 points that year, taking advantage of Nick Lardis, fellow Blackhawks prospect, being out for a good chunk of that season due to injury, wound up being the leading point scorer for the Bulldogs, and along with his speedy skating ability and decent frame, wound up being selected in the first round by Chicago. But yeah, not necessarily the production we wanted to see out of Vanacker last year, but he did at least end the season on a high note, and he's going to be returning to Brantford for likely his final season there, and is going to absolutely dominate that league along with high first-round selection in this year's draft, Jake O'Brien. But as I mentioned, the intrigue around Vanacker is he's 6'1" and he plays with a lot of pace, has a well-rounded game about him too, takes his defensive responsibility seriously, and I do think has a diverse skill set in terms of can score goals from the bumper roll in the power play. He's done a lot of that for Brantford in the past, has a pretty decent release, and I think because of his speed, that gives him some good playmaking upside as well. Does need to add some weight, will need to learn how to play against grown men, obviously, but still a young man, only 19 years old. I'm very intrigued by Marek Vanacker, and there was actually just an article written by Scott Wheeler of The Athletic in the last day about Marek Vanacker and how he's just barely scratching the surface here. I think I kind of agree with that statement because there is so much speed and so much intrigue in terms of his skill set. I really do believe Vanacker, if he develops properly, can be a middle six winger of the future in Chicago. I feel like he is kind of in a similar vein to Oliver Moore, in my opinion, but not quite as fast. And my reasoning behind having Vanacker in the top 10 here is I believe he has the higher upside than someone like Jack Pridham and is more of a proven commodity right here, right now than Mason West or Vaclav Nestrasil. So Marek Vanacker next up in my Blackhawks prospect list comes in at number 10. Following him at number 9, I have Drew Commesso, the 46th pick in the 2020 NHL draft, second round selection by the Blackhawks that year, now listed as a 6'2", 181-pound goaltender, and he just turned 23 years old a little over 1 week ago on July 16th. In this past season, he went 18, 15, and 6 with a 2.54 goals against, 911 save percentage, and 4 shutouts in 39 regular season games with the Ice Hogs. Was incredible post after January. I would say, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but he had to be one of the best goaltenders in all of the AHL. And then that definitely carried over in the Calder Cup playoffs as he had a 2.35 goals against average, 926 save percentage, and 1 shutout in 7 postseason games. We also saw him make his NHL debut in New Jersey and wound up appearing in another game for the Blackhawks, but is now entering his 3rd pro season, expected to once again open up the year with the Rockford Ice Hogs. However, there are a lot of question marks in between the pipes for the Blackhawks, but considering they brought back Arvid Soderblom, that is the expectation for Drew Commesso. And I don't think, Commesso doesn't necessarily have that one trait or that one skill that stands out, but I've always been very impressed with just how balanced of a goaltender he is. He does all the little things well. He never gets himself out of position. He has some decent size, maybe not the ideal, 6'6" frame that we see out of goaltenders in the modern era, but over 6 foot, well at 6'2", and just has a lot of good experience for a goalie who just turned 23 years old, whether that's, for the United States Development Program, for Boston University in his couple of years there, representing the United States at the Olympics and the World Championships, playing in the Calder Cup playoffs these last couple of years for the Rockford Ice Hogs. He's racked up a lot of quality experiences, like I said, for a young goaltender. He is now, though, definitely behind Spencer Knight in the pecking order, right? He doesn't quite match Spencer Knight's upside, but I really do think Commesso has all the qualities, and if he puts up another successful year down in Rockford, he's going to be in the NHL sooner rather than later. It's going to be interesting to see how the Blackhawks are exactly going to handle that, but I do think he has the traits to be a starter in the NHL one day down the road. Still got to learn a little bit more about Commesso because we just haven't seen him have enough NHL action, and there have been plenty of goaltenders who have performed well down in the AHL who have just never quite developed. We still need to see a little bit more from Drew Commesso to know exactly what kind of goalie he can be up in the NHL, but I do believe he has all the qualities, the good experiences, and some successful results at a young age to be a starter one day in the NHL. So that's why, because of his upside being a starter, I do have him a little bit higher than Merrick Vanacker here in my rankings, and have Drew Commesso coming in at number 9. There are numbers 9 and 10 and my updated Chicago Blackhawks prospects list. Coming up in just a moment here, Hawks fans, stick with me as I'll dive into which prospects I have ranked between numbers 6 through 8 in the organization. Real quick, though, I do got to talk to you all first about Game Time. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show that you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. And that's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever because prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can also save up to 60% with their killer last-minute deals. And if you're worried about what happens when plans change, well, the Game Time guarantee has your back with event cancellation protection and much more. So make sure to go and check out the Game Time app, download it today, create an account, and then use our promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps, and you'll get $20 off on your first purchase. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps when you download the Game Time app and create an account to get $20 off with your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed, Game Time. Real quick before I get into segment 2, just a reminder to please go and smash that like button, subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube if you enjoy what you watch here on YouTube on a daily basis. And also heads up to be on the lookout for my 4th and final edition of my Blackhawks Summer 2025 Top Prospects list dropping here tomorrow, where I'll break down my top 5. But segment 2 on today's show, picking up where I left off and getting into my top 8 prospects in the Blackhawks organization. Kicking things off here at number 8, I have Nick Lardis, the 67th pick in the 2023 NHL draft, now listed at 5'11", around 185 pounds, although, as he mentioned to Scott Powers of The Athletic, probably last month at this point now, in an interview he mentioned because he suffered an injury during the OHL postseason that forced him to be off the ice. He did lose a little bit of weight, is around 180 pounds right now, but working his way to get back up to that 185, 190 pound mark. And Lardis turned 20 this summer as well, similar to Drew Commesso in early July. But of course, he had a mammoth season in the OHL with the Brantford Bulldogs, along with Merrick Vanacker, who I got into at number 10. 117 points for Nick Lardis in the O this year, 71 goals, 46 assists in just 65 regular season games, 4th in the entire OHL in points, 1st in goals, obviously, 1st player in the CHL to record 70 goals in a season since John Tavares back in 2007. Yeah, it was an incredibly fun year to watch from Nick Lardis. And he also was on a nice run in the postseason for Brantford as well, with 15 points, 11 goals, and 4 assists in the first 7 playoff games until he unfortunately suffered an injury as a result of a bad hit. That put a close on Nick Lardis' junior career. He is now going to be making the leap to the professional scene, likely beginning the year with the Rockford Ice Hogs of the AHL, unless something ridiculous happens to him in training camp or the preseason, unless he goes absolutely bonkers. But the intrigue around Nick Lardis is all about the goal scoring, right? Elite goal scoring tendencies, knows where to be in order to find the open ice. Also just has a monster of a shot, can rip it past opposing goaltenders with ease. Dominant on the power play, and I do think he has developed the playmaking much better here over these last couple of years, and all in all just sees the ice really well, in particular on the man advantage. But there are some concerns about Lardis's off the puck abilities and also the lack of size, and if he's going to be able to have the same success that he has in junior against grown men here. Those are kind of the concerns around Lardis right now. We obviously have to see how he's going to look against grown men here for the first time this fall, but he's got a world of upside, right? And if he does wind up hitting, if he does wind up being an NHLer, it's probably, I really feel like he's going to be a 25, 30 goal scorer consistently in this league if he winds up translating well. And if he does, that would mean he could be a legitimate top 6 threat for the Blackhawks down the road. It's just about developing his off the puck skills a little bit more, rounding out his game with a little bit better defense, continuing to gain weight and get stronger, and just racking up that experience at the pro level. It's going to be an interesting year for Nick Lardis, that is for sure. And because of his elite goal scoring tendencies and true top 6 upside, I think he deserves to be inside the top 8 here and take a little bit of a leap up in my Blackhawks prospect rankings from where I had him last year. I still feel the same way about Nick Lardis, though. Like, he easily could be someone who we look back at in a couple years and be like, yeah, he was definitely too low. He's got all the upside in the world, but he is still a little bit of a risky prospect at this point in time. But that upside alone had him ahead of guys like Drew Commesso and Marek Vanacker in this prospect pool, but isn't at the tippity top of this list despite having that upside, because he is a little bit of a riskier prospect. Could very well be inside my top 5 the next time I do this list, though, at the midway point of the 25-26 season. Next up at number 7, just ahead of Nick Lardis, I have Roman Kanserov, the 44th pick for the Blackhawks in the 2023 NHL draft. Second round selection, 5'9", 176-pound winger who's set to turn 21 years old in September, and had 38 points, 13 goals, and 25 assists. Kanserov in 47 KHL games this past season with Metallurg. Had a ridiculously strong start to the season, kind of cooled off down the stretch, but still incredible numbers for a 20-year-old in the top professional league over there in Russia. And he picked up where he left off the year prior in the KHL playoffs, where he was much more productive than he was in the regular season, took on a much larger role, wound up tallying 13 points, 4 goals, and 9 assists in 23 postseason games to help Metallurg win the Gagarin Cup. And I think that just gave him some good momentum, and I'm sure also gave Metallurg's coaching staff some good confidence in Kanserov heading into the season. And he certainly made the most of that opportunity, in particular in those first couple of months of the 24-25 campaign. He's going to be returning to the KHL, though, this year, where hopefully he'll be comfortably over a point per game margin. But it's the final year of his contract over in the KHL, and the expectation is fully that he's going to be joining on with the Blackhawks when his season comes to a close. So going to be fascinating to see when that winds up happening for Roman Kanserov, and whether he'll be able to get in any NHL games there down the stretch in March or April. But Kanserov is another player with great speed. Clearly, Kyle Davidson has prioritized that in drafting prospects right. Great speed, diverse offensive skill set, someone kind of similar to Marek Vanacker and Jack Pridham in that sense, where I think he has both good goal scoring and playmaking tendencies, and definitely having that pace gives him higher upside. And Kanserov also is someone who plays with a high motor. Admittedly, because he plays in the KHL, we don't see like a ton of his raw footage, but he's known to be someone who plays with a ton of pace on both sides of the ice, utilizes that speed on the defensive side of things as well. And from everything I have seen from him and from everything I've read on Roman Kanserov, I don't think he's necessarily the same high octane type of player, but he kind of feels like a Russian Frank Nazar in a bit of a sense, right? An undersized type of player, but someone who isn't afraid to buzz all around the ice and can make his presence felt in a lot of ways. And again, has that diverse, well-rounded offensive skill set. So lots of potential here for Roman Kanserov as well. 2 very sound years to kick off his KHL career. Hopefully ends it on a high note before coming over to North America. He's someone who, like Nick Lardis, has a lot of upside if he does wind up hitting and does wind up being a full-time NHLer puzzle piece for the Blackhawks. I think it's as a middle 6, potentially second-line winger down the road, but does have a little bit of risk with him as well, as kind of all those later drafted Russian prospects seem to have. It's going to be a different style. It's going to be a little bit of a different game, but Roman Kanserov has a lot of the raw tools that you want to see from a skilled player who's going to be coming over to North America here within the next, 7 to 8 months. So Roman Kanserov coming in at number 7, a little bit more of a proven commodity than Nick Lardis. I really had a tough time ranking those two, and I really had a tough time ranking each of these 3 prospects between numbers 8 and 6. I really think you could flip them in any different way you want. It's just depending on who you ask and when you ask them. But at number 6, Blackhawks fans, closing out part 3 here today, I have Oliver Moore 19th overall pick for the Blackhawks in 2023. And by the way, we really could look back at the 2023 draft and be like, oh my goodness, what great work Kyle Davidson did, right? Oliver Moore, Connor Bedard. I know Adam Guyan hasn't developed nicely since being the first goalie off the board, but still loads of time for him to turn things around. Roman Kanserov, Nick Lardis, right? Like so many prospects have developed nicely since being selected in 2023. But Oliver Moore is a 5'11", 194-pound forward who has played center all throughout his, junior career with the United States Development Program and with Minnesota for 2 years, but did play largely on the wing in his short stint with the Blackhawks last year. He's set to turn 21 years old this winter in January. During his sophomore season with Minnesota, Moore tallied 33 points, 12 goals, 21 assists in 38 games. Also added 5 points, 1 goal, 4 assists in 7 contests at the 2025 World Juniors to help Team USA win their second consecutive gold medal. Oliver Moore, a big part of both of those. And I don't think it's any surprise considering the way that he goes about his business. But then joined on with the Blackhawks along with his Minnesota teammate Sam Renzel and tallied 4 assists in his first 9 NHL games. And again, is going to be battling along with guys like Colton Dock, a couple of others that I've mentioned previously on this list that are slipping. My Landon Slager to someone I mentioned in the honorable mentions category, going to be competing for some of those final roster spots for the Blackhawks in training camp. But what it's all about with Oliver Moore is speed, baby. Probably the fastest player, not even probably, he is the fastest player in the Blackhawks prospect pool. And with that, he buzzes all around the ice to make an impact in all 3 zones. Very hard worker, really good along the boards, and takes his defensive responsibility seriously. And I know the Blackhawks utilized him mainly on the wing last year, in a short sample size, of course. I do really wonder if Oliver Moore is going to get more ice time down the middle for the Blackhawks or for the Rockford Ice Hogs this year, considering just how seriously he takes the defensive side of things and how much of an impact he can play in that role. I really do think it'll be more natural for him to play the center ice position. But of course, the Blackhawks are very deep at center in their prospect pool. Speed is, probably the main driving force of his offensive production. I don't think Oliver Moore is ever someone who's going to have like elite playmaking abilities. I don't really think he's ever going to be like a 70-point scorer in the NHL because, again, he just doesn't have outstanding playmaking. He doesn't have elite goal scoring or anything, but his speed just puts him in so many good spots and gives him opportunities to produce on the offensive side of things that he's just going to put himself in those positions to wind up racking up point totals. And also, he's definitely going to have to work on his hands a little bit. His hands are still not quite caught up to his feet, and he is going to have to work on his shot and add some weight. But I still think Oliver Moore, again, because of that speed and because of his hardworking nature, he just has such a high floor. I have no doubt that Oliver Moore is going to provide a massive impact to the Blackhawks in lots of different ways, right? He can play center and wing. He could probably play on the second power play unit. I think he's going to be a staple of the penalty kill for a long time. And just thinking about Oliver Moore and Frank Nazar possibly being out there to kill penalties together and all the havoc they're going to cause down the road defensively for the Chicago Blackhawks. Like, yeah, Oliver Moore. What Oliver Moore reminds me of, this is kind of a weird comparison, Blackhawks fans. I don't know how much, basketball crossover I'll have with my audience, but Oliver Moore, this is a bad comparison because he hasn't developed well in Chicago, but he's a Pat Williams almost type of player, a Kawhi Leonard type of guy, right? Super high ceiling, really believe he's going to be an impact player, already knows the defensive side of the game very well and has the speed, right? So that gives him tremendous offensive upside. He still needs to just learn a little bit more and continue to develop some of his offensive skill sets, I think, to truly maximize his potential in that area. But because he has the speed, because he has incredible pace, that's always going to give him an opportunity to do so. And I really believe Oliver Moore is going to wind up being a consistent 50 to 60 point producer for the Blackhawks, who again has his fingerprints like Frank Nazar over all the success that this team has, because he just provides so much value in lots of different ways. So like I said a moment ago, it was kind of hard for me to sort through Lardis, Kanserov, and Oliver Moore here at numbers 8 through 6. I think Lardis and Kanserov are the two players with the higher ceiling, but Moore still has a pretty high ceiling himself respectively, and definitely has the higher floor between those two players. Is not really risky whatsoever in my opinion, because again, I kind of think he's gone about his business and has played a well-rounded game for so long. He goes about things like a pro. So that was my reasoning behind having Oliver Moore ahead of those two and coming in here at number 6. That is going to take care of part 3 of my Blackhawks Summer 2025 top prospects list. Let me know in the comment section how you think I've done up to this point, and whether you think I had someone like Oliver Moore too high. Did I have someone like Nick Lardis or Drew Comesso too low? Let me know your full thoughts on my prospects list up to this point in time. But coming up in just a moment, Blackhawks fans, before I wrap things up, don't go anywhere, as I still have to get into some key takeaways that I had from Mason West's recent interview with Jon Gruden. First, I just want to say thank you to everyone quickly for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen. Here to start off your day. For your second listen, go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where there is no off season, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. And you can now find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, Blackhawks 2025 first-round pick Mason West, who was featured in part 2 of my current Blackhawks prospects list, recently joined Jon Gruden of Barstool Sports for an interview on Gruden Goes Long. And as I brought up right off the jump, I know there are a lot of split opinions on Barstool Sports and everything they do in the sports media scene. But regardless of how you feel about that, I personally love Jon Gruden. I think he is an absolute national treasure. I know he has that history about him, but just his energy is absolutely, you can't ignore it, right? And I thought it was just so fun and also interesting to see him sit down with a prospect like Mason West. I thought it was a phenomenal interview. Definitely recommend each and every one of you go and check it out. But I wanted to bring up some noteworthy takeaways that I had from this interview here real quick before closing out today's show. First and foremost, Mason West mentioned that his dad actually was from Chicago and played basketball at Eastern Illinois and grew up as a Blackhawks fan. I don't know necessarily, how true that is. I feel like we do hear this a lot with Blackhawks prospects saying they grew up Blackhawks fans, and I'm sure that's not strictly happening to the Blackhawks, right? I'm sure we hear that with lots of different teams whenever they get drafted to their respected clubs. They say, "Oh, I've always watched you guys. I've been a big fan for a long time." Well, I do feel that the likelihood of that being true is higher, because the Blackhawks, for all of these kids, when they were growing up, the Blackhawks were in their dynasty era. They were on throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs, one of the best teams in all of hockey. So maybe that's true. And obviously, like I said, Mason West does have the Chicago family ties, but I just think it's interesting as someone who grew up in Minnesota surrounded by Wild fans. They didn't have a very good time during those 2010 postseason runs, because the Blackhawks were seemingly knocking them out each and every year. So that must have made for some interesting friendships between Mason West if he was truly a Blackhawks fan growing up. But he did say that lots of family ties and connections to the Chicagoland area, which I thought was super cool. And he also brought up that he recently traveled to Chicago for a family reunion. So just the fact that he has lots of family here, I'm sure there's going to be tons of folks, from what it sounds like, in attendance whenever he does wind up making his NHL debut. Just makes it cooler that he was selected by the Chicago Blackhawks. West also mentioned that he is now, I brought this up a couple of days ago when going through part 2 and when diving into Mason West coming in at number 13 in my current list, that he is now up to 6'7" and is about 225 pounds. And again, This is a kid who isn't set to turn 18 years old until August. He is an absolute grown man. And I guess I should have brought this up first, but the biggest thing that stood out to me about Mason West in this interview is just what a good kid he is. He seems like he didn't really take the interview or himself too seriously. He was having a lot of fun with Gruden. He was giving him his snap count as a quarterback, right? And Gruden, I think, was really impressed and said, he's a coach's dream for multiple different reasons. And I could easily see why the Blackhawks probably fell in love with Mason West when they were interviewing him. In addition to him being just an absolute gargantuan for a 17-year-old of a human, super easy, down-to-earth, really relaxed kid who just said all the right things. And I was really impressed overall by him in this interview. Some other things, though, that I took away from this interview with Jon Gruden. Mason West mentioned that Matt Cullen is pretty involved with the Fargo Force. He's a minority owner of the club. He, of course, is a former 3-time Stanley Cup champion, and West gave lots of props to both him and Fargo Force head coach Brett Skinner for kind of helping him on the development path these last couple of years. In terms of the reasoning why a kid from Edina, a kid from Minnesota, wound up choosing Michigan State over the Golden Gophers to embark upon his college journey, he mentioned that not only because of the success the program has had in recent years, but also because he saw a power forward and someone who he seems to be a good friend with in Charlie Stramel, who was selected in the first round a couple of years ago, wound up transferring from Wisconsin to Michigan State and had a really solid past season with them as a power forward. And Mason West naturally sees himself into a similar kind of mold as Stramel, someone in that power forward type of body, someone who has a long reach, but also some good skating abilities. So it seems like he was really impressed with how Stramel was able to take his game to the next level with the Spartans and is hoping to do the same things there. He also mentioned in terms of returning to Edina for his senior season of high school, he also brought up how Anders Lee returned to Edina as well for his senior season of high school in a very similar way that Mason West is about to do. And Mason said, I think Anders Lee is doing all right. And I do believe there's going to be natural comparisons to Mason West and Anders Lee moving forward. But I really do believe Mason is the better skater, and I don't want to say the better athlete of the two, because Anders Lee has some absolute tree trunk legs and, obviously was a very sound quarterback in his own right. But I feel like Anders Lee is more of a true big body power forward goal scorer in front of the net. He does have a decent shot as well. Mason West, I feel like, is just going to be able to utilize his speed and make an impact in multiple different ways because of that compared to someone like Anders Lee. I could see why, obviously, they have the comparisons, both quarterbacks in Minnesota, both, big power forward type of bodies, but I really do think Mason West is going to be a different type of player than Anders Lee. And when I brought up Mason West a couple of days ago in part 2, I mentioned that it was a 38-8 touchdown to interception ratio during his junior season. I apologize for that, Mason. I kind of shafted you there. 37 touchdowns, 4 interceptions for Mason West during his junior year. Let's see what type of numbers he puts up as a senior in his final year of high school ball. Mentioned, obviously, that he's going to be staying loyal to hockey, as he's been outspoken about since being selected by the Blackhawks. But not only is he going to stay loyal to the Hawks and stay loyal to hockey, he brought up that he's also staying loyal to his high school football team by returning there for his senior season. So again, just kind of saying the right things. And I certainly understand Mason West's perspective behind that, especially after seeing someone like Anders Lee, a successful NHLer, go about that route. Even if it was, a little over a decade ago. Last but certainly not least, Mason West is expected to play in 40 to 50 USHL games for the Fargo Force next year after wrapping up his senior season of high school. Only got to play in 10 games for them after wrapping up his junior year because obviously he was a full-time student. So it's going to be a much larger sample size for Mason West in the USHL this season, which is definitely music to my ears, before being shipped off to Michigan State for his freshman campaign in 26-27. But that's going to close out today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. That way you don't miss out on that way you'll get notified when the episode is uploaded each and every day. Till tomorrow's episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.